Canada has officially responded to the latest U.S. escalation in tariffs. The federal government is hitting back with dollar-for-dollar counter tariffs on hundreds of U.S. products. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump continues to fire off against Canada in the wake of trade talks falling apart. Today, he said Canada has been ripping off the U.S. for decades. I deal with many countries, and Canada is easily the most difficult and unreasonable. They feel entitled, but they are not a state and will be entitled no longer. Trump also posted this picture, a threat to rename Lake Ontario Lake America, after Ontario Premier Doug Ford called Trump a bully, a dictator and a loser, and told him to kiss his ass. Time now for the Power Panel. Supriya Dwivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. And Nathan Cullen is a former NDP MP and BC NDP minister. Nice to see you all, guys. Thanks for being here on this Tuesday. Supriya, I'll start with you. The government is slapping retaliatory tariffs on American goods, fulfilling their promise to hit back at Trump. Do you think that they made the right move by doing something like this?
Yeah, look, I do. And I fully understand that the entire notion of retaliatory tariffs is making things more expensive for your own people ultimately, right? But there's no real option here other than to hit back dollar for dollar. Trump can't keep clocking us in the face while we do nothing. And while I can certainly appreciate that there are very smart folks out there that are, pointing out either the differences in the sizes of our economies or the fact that counter tariffs will ultimately make things more expensive for Canadians, sure, that's all well and good, but like having a spine and standing up to a bully matters. And I also think the government is being smart and strategic about the kinds of products that they're going after, right? They're going after strategically placed U.S. products where Canadian alternatives are available. So you can probably get your way out of that if you wanted to buy Canadian. And there's also the way that they're targeting the states. I mean, you're looking at states that are really going to feel it. Many of which are purplish states that can go either way, and that where the races are going to be quite tight for the upcoming midterms. So in an ideal world, none of this happens, but we're in the dumbest timeline, and we've got to do something with the world's largest bully breathing down our neck.
Yeah, Lisa, what is interesting about the list is that so many of the goods, as Supriya says, come from U.S. swing states. I was looking through it today. Lobster from Maine, plastic products, appliances from Ohio, cheese from Wisconsin. On lobster in particular, it could be a real conundrum for that state because Canada actually processes more than half of their lobster that they catch in Maine. Half of it goes to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and then is sent back over the border. That could be a problem for, say, Susan Collins, a Republican who's running in the Senate race in Maine, and it's a crucial vote, really, to hold on to Republican control of the Senate. This seems deliberate, right? Perhaps that they've gone through the list of potential products and decided, hey, maybe let's inflict a little political pain on the United States.
Well, there's 700 different items, I think, that they've applied a tariff to. So some of the stuff is going to be evergreen, the stuff that you would always reach for if you had a war with the United States in trade. And every government knows what they are, and they're the simple ones. But you're right. I mean, if they're targeting Maine and Michigan, for example, that is because that's where you're seeing a lot of the concern in terms of how people are going to be voting in the midterms, and it'll get the attention. The problem is that with retaliation comes more retaliation. And that's why I think Minister was trying to say that, this is very targeted and it's not temporary, but it's not among the things that we necessarily want to do. But we've got more things that we could do as well, meaning that, if you retaliate, we still have more to go. But that spiral is not helpful to either of our countries. So I agree with Supriya. I think it's okay. It's that they did the retaliatory tariffs. What I would ask the government, though, is just to be very nimble and cognizant of where there's unintended consequences from these tariffs, because it's a broad instrument of destruction, quite frankly. And you may have some unintended consequences here in Canada that will impact our businesses even more, especially the ones that are not part of the 338 tariffs. And as a result, just be ready to make change or to help the impacted industries should something happen that you're not quite expecting.
Yeah, Nathan, so many people in this country were clamoring for some sort of response like this, but ultimately it's Canadians, it's Canadian businesses that are on the hook, right, to pay higher prices for goods that are coming in from the United States that made it onto this list today. Do you still think it was the right call?
Yeah, of course. I'm not sure there was a lot of options left. Look, when two parties go into a negotiation, you hope that they have some kind of shared goal as an outcome. That wasn't true. Like the Americans have been clear under Donald Trump, they want to destroy the Canadian auto sector. They do not want cars built in Canada sold in the United States. We should believe them when they tell us that. So the fact that this trade negotiation went off the rails so badly was somewhat predictable, unfortunately. I don't lay the fault of that at the government. I think they had an unreasonable, unpredictable, and oftentimes unintelligent party across the table to deal with. Second, what is the signature worth? I've been saying this for months. Like, we're working hard to try to get a trade deal with somebody who has signed many trade deals, which he has not honored as soon as he signs them. So the relationship has got to be about more. The one thing that's especially tricky with this president is normally a politician cares about the people they represent, especially the people who voted for them. Mr. Trump seems a little less concerned with farmers and manufacturers in the swing states and the border states, that normally that would be a powerful leverage. It's not as powerful as it should be because we're dealing with such an odd figure when it comes to Donald Trump, that the usual things you'd want an elected representative to be motivated by, he isn't. He's motivated by other things. I'm glad Ford took the temperature down, by the way. I think it starts to look bad on us. I don't think it probably helps. It might feel good in the day, in the moment. It's kind of funny. But for the long term, you do need the adults in the room talking, showing reasonable things. And to Lisa's point, nimbleness. We don't know what the effects of this are going to be. It's all bad, though. There's not any good in this other than maybe some Canadian companies doing better than we'd hoped. And I've seen in the tourism sector, at least, it's been asymmetrical. Americans are still broadly coming to Canada. In BC at least, and not so much Canadians going south of the border.
So Priya, I don't know if you heard BC Premier David Eby off the top of our show. He was doing a press conference on these measures that were announced today. He's actually asking the federal government to go further. He wants some non-tariff barriers, if you will, saying don't buy the F-35 jets from the United States right now, ban American coal from coming into Canada and being shipped abroad. He says we need to go further still. Is there going to be pressure on the Prime Minister to ramp this up further beyond these retaliatory tariffs that were announced today?
For sure. And I'd imagine that he's, hearing it from not just Premier Eby, but from, folks that would be within his circle that have his ear. I would just say, though, I think Lisa was sort of alluding to this, but, this is where the Prime Minister has to keep a cooler head. It may feel good in the moment, and I'm all for punching a bully back in the face. But at the end of the day, ultimately, he has to be the one that is guided by the interests of Canadians and Canada. And to Lisa's point, going down a spiral of furthering this, it's like eventually we got to start digging up, right? We can't just keep digging down and getting us further into a hole here. We have to find some sort of off ramp. One thing that I've seen floated by a bunch of very smart people is this notion that Canada also holds a ton of U.S. debt, right? Is that's going to be a pain point for the U.S. if we were to unload a bunch of that. There are certain things that we can do that would, of course, have an impact, but then we have to be, if we're going to do that, then we have to at least have a plan for whatever gets thrown back our way.
Yeah, Lisa, we've seen some polling from Angus Reid Institute, just overwhelming support for the Prime Minister's decision to walk away. I think it was about 75%, I think, if I remember the numbers correctly, believe that it was right for Carney to say, we're not doing this deal. But the opposition parties are raising some concerns. Let's listen to some of the tape we heard today.
We asked the Prime Minister today to reveal the cost to individual families of his proposed counter tariffs. He said the other day that tariffs are taxes. That is a quote. So what will the retaliatory tariffs mean for grocery bills, gas prices, and the cost of everyday goods?
I think we need to think a little bit pandemic era in terms of supporting people who are going to go through not a sudden rupture, but an unfolding one over weeks and months and potentially the next couple of years.
Lisa, what's the appropriate role for the opposition parties in this moment? It's kind of like it's a tough moment for them, right? Because they want to obviously criticize the government, but the country is so united behind the Prime Minister in some way. How do they kind of interject themselves into this conversation?
I think doing exactly what both are doing. I mean, Nathan can speak to what Avi Lewis said, but that seems to be something that I would absolutely anticipate the NDP to talk about, to make sure that when you're doing the relief programs, that people are considered, not just corporations. On the Conservative side, I think it makes sense for Pierre to ask what the cost is to the economy, because that's what people are going to care about. He'll also want to ask, what are the costs of the programs? You know, how much is it going to cost and where's the money going to come from? These are all valid questions. They're things that you should be able to answer. I find it interesting that the United States, there is an economist who actually quantified what the Section 338 tariffs on Canada was going to cost an American family. And it was like $50 to $100 a year. That's it. Like, that's not a lot of money when it comes down to the impact on the American side for the tariffs that we're experiencing here now. It's interesting to have the point against it in terms of what it's going to cost Canada. I also think I'm going to be, you know, I sit on the advisory council and I have great benefit of having briefings. By the way, I don't have any more information than anybody else who has in terms of what's been reported. But I do agree with the Conservatives that it would be very helpful to have a very coherent session with media, with Parliament, from the trade negotiators at a table, being able to answer questions as to what was on the table, what was not on the table, and what caused the decision to happen. I think we have learned lessons to come out of it. I don't think it's really helpful with people trying to read between the lines and seek U.S. sources of information to get their side of the story out, as opposed to having our officials. I want to hear it. Sorry for Janice Charette for giving you more work that you don't probably need, but I'd like to hear it from Janice Charette, and I'd like to hear it from Dominic LeBlanc. And I think that they could handle a press conference detailing what happened at the table without divulging any Canadian, strategy secrets.
Yeah, Nathan, the Conservatives want to recall Parliament. They want to get people back here to Ottawa to discuss what went down with those failed trade talks, to present more details in public, as Lisa is saying. Come back maybe a month or so early. Is that prudent?
It depends on the intent, right? If the intent, as Lisa described it, is to find out what was particularly bad that was called us to say this is a poison pill and we walked away, rather than these drips and drabs, that would a coherent package. This is what the impact would have been. I think the only thing I found confusing Mr. Poilievre's message is that it's broadly supportive, I think, of walking away from this deal, but then puts this negative light on the counter tariffs and the choices the Prime Minister is making by saying, what's it going to cost Canadian families? Yeah. That's why I raised the question about intent. It's not in and of itself a bad question to ask. It's what are you trying to get at? Are you suggesting that we shouldn't, dollar for dollar? Are you suggest, as Mr. Poilievre has said in the past, are you suggesting that we should sign what was on offer at the table? That's where it gets a little bit more difficult. But I don't see, to Lisa's point, I don't see any problem with saying, look, they did go after French language at the last minute. They went after heavy duty trucks. We did the math. It was terrible. And I think there's a broader acceptance of our sovereignty needing to be sacrosanct. And you can't tell us who we trade with, who we don't, and how we trade with them. Screw off. We don't get that power when you get to a negotiating table with Canada. I think that red line was enough for me. It was fine for the Prime Minister to come out and to declare that that was raised. I'm good at that point, because I don't need Donald Trump holding the pen on our trade deals as we go around the world looking for other customers other than them.
So, Priya, Donald Trump was holding not only the pen, but the Twitter machine today, tweeting up a storm on social media about Canada. All morning, there was a number of missives fired our way. And one of them was about how he wants to change Lake Ontario to Lake America, or at least he's contemplating that. Are you ignoring this rhetoric? Do you think that it's just bogus? Or is this, a serious threat to our sovereignty? And the reason I raise it, not only because of this social media post, but his Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, also getting on board with this plan today. And, Doug Burgum obviously has some say over maps and such. That's his responsibility. Are you worried?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's entirely possible that they would go through the steps to do that, just as they did with the Gulf of Mexico, right? I would like to hope, at least this time around, perhaps some of the tech companies have learned their lesson and won't actually rename it, as I believe certain ones did when the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico happened. I think the main thing about this that got me, though, is that I think Trump has sort of lost his juice here. He's a lot of things, but he's not unfunny. In fact, one of the most tragic things about his presidency is how objectively funny so much of it is. You want to hate him, and then he goes and delivers a comedically genius line, and you're like, all right, that was legitimately funny. But after his terrible White House Correspondents' dinner speech, and now this, it's like, this is the best you can do? Like, you're just giving us, like, repeats? Like, go back to the drawing board and come up with something that's at least actually funny if you're going to so callously threaten Canada and our sovereignty.
Yeah, Lisa, I mean, maybe we're lucky it is kind of weak sauce. There could be worse threatened against us, right? I mean, I know he just yesterday promised 50% tariffs on cars and auto parts as of January 1st, but maybe we should be happy he's just threatening to rename something, not inflict total economic pain on us.
Yeah, here's my concern about that. He's kind of reducing a very serious trade matter to a bit of mockery. And that's what's landing in the American public. If you notice, if you take a look at the media down there, we're not featuring prominently in terms of the real serious impact it's having in our relationship between Canada and the United States. It's kind of more lightly treated by the American media than anything else. So Donald Trump making even more fun of it or saying outlandish things like Lake Ontario is now Lake America, those things would be looked at with a bit of mockery. I don't think anyone believes it. As well, I would just point out from a legal point of view, we do have something called the International Joint Commission that kind of is responsible for the Great Lakes, and we share them and that kind of stuff. So it's obviously he's just trying to riff on what he wanted to do with respect to the Gulf of America, the Gulf of Mexico. And we should try to make it more serious than it is. I think if there's anything we're losing on creating the narrative in the United States about how important we are to them on trade and how devastating this is to both of our economies.
Nathan, quick final word to you.
Yeah, that's just it. He undermines the seriousness of it by making those jokes, whether they work or not. He's trying to diminish the entire exercise. American awareness of the trade war that we are now, the worst one we've had in over a century, is very low, less than 26%. Still popular relatively with MAGA Republicans, not with the swing base. But again, this is the president that doesn't seem to care much. I still call it the Gulf of Mexico, as does everybody else. So his big play to dominate the maps didn't work. And I think the bond issue that Supriya raised is actually one of the most powerful bullets in the gun for Canada. That is the one that Americans do have to concern themselves with at the Commerce and Treasury departments. We'll see if that idea starts to float out of Ottawa as a possibility.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, but coming up, is Ontario Premier Doug Ford hurting or helping Canada's position in this trade war? The Power Panel picks up that conversation next. Ontario Premier Doug Ford did not hold back while speaking yesterday about U.S. President Donald Trump.
No, I don't respond to a dictator like President Trump, a bully like President Trump. He's the type of guy in school that would take your lunch money one day, take your toque off your head the next day, and then steal your running shoes. I'm not going to take any advice off a guy that's the king of bankruptcies. You know, your own people, President Trump, don't even like you. And they're going to speak loud and clear when it comes to the midterms. And if I was allowed to, I'd be down there door knocking. I've dealt with guys like you my whole life. And guess what? You all become losers because you're a loser. I have more courage, more brains in my baby toe than he has in his whole body. I've been in this game a lot longer than he has. I got skin on me like an alligator. And you think an insult from him hurts me? Well, bring it on, buddy. I'm ready. Bring it on. I have a lot of real estate on my ass, so he has a lot of room to kiss my ass.
But today, Ford turned down the temperature while speaking to U.S. media.
Things got a little heated. It got a little personal yesterday between the president and myself. But I want to make a good deal for the American people, a good deal for the Canadians. And we're the two greatest countries in the world. We're each other's number one customer. We love the U.S. And it's unfortunate that President Trump has taken this avenue. We're stronger together. I always say we're stronger together. Let's build Fortress North America. Let's create more jobs on both the border.
Let's bring back the Power Panel. Supriya Dwivedi, Lisa Ray, and Nathan Cullen. Supriya, what do you make of, his comments yesterday? He was really coming out slinging some mud after Trump, of course, attacked him first. Today, dialing it back a little more tepid in his response to what Trump is doing to this country. What do you make of that change?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm different on this panel where my language is subject to CBC Ombudsman complaints and the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council than I am chatting on a podcast where my language can be more colorful, perhaps, right? So I think he was just, fitting the moment. I think also, likely to his point, it was in the heat of the moment yesterday. He was emotional about it. I can certainly appreciate that. I think the general role that, Premier Ford has been playing as Premier Canoe and some of the others is to kind of be the bad cop to Carney's bon cop, right? Like they're doing this whole bon cop, bad cop thing, good cop, bad cop thing. And I think it works. They're not, the premiers aren't the ones that are, around the negotiating table, and they have to represent ultimately, their own constituents' interests. And for Premier Ford, I think he does that best when he is standing up very vociferously to the American president, especially somebody who, as admitted by the premier himself, used to be a big supporter of the president. And I think that there are a lot of folks that likely listen to him. So I can certainly appreciate the fact that he had to dial some of that back or tone it down, at least when he was making the media rounds today. But I mean, I always thought that the premier was right to take out that ad that was pointing out, during the Jays run in the World Series about how Ronald Reagan felt about the tariffs. And I thought it was a mistake to sort of throw the premier under the bus the way that, the prime minister sort of did at the time, because I think ultimately, on the balance of things, even though I'm certainly not a supporter of, Premier Ford and his government, I think he genuinely has the interest of Ontarians at heart and in mind when he's making those comments.
Lisa, a federal conservative texted me today and said, well, Doug Ford just won a fourth majority government. Based on that performance yesterday. And this is not a fan of Doug Ford, I should point out. This is someone who's not on side with him all the time. But because of this rhetoric, because of this narrative that he put out there yesterday, people are eating it up, right? People kind of like that feisty attitude that he takes, and maybe it will be a winner politically.
Well, because it reflects exactly what people are thinking, JP. That's what it is. He said out loud what everybody is saying in their own heads because they can't believe this is happening to us. And that's really valid. I can't believe it's happening to us either. Now, the premier did get quite hot, I have to say. He said some personal things, I think, about the president that probably went beyond just picking up for the province. But I'm going to give him a lot of kudos. He did a pretty good round of media interviews in the United States today, showing the appropriate amount of regret for the words that he used without seeming like he's groveling. So he hit a really good balance in terms of trying to say, yeah, folks, I got a little hot yesterday, but you have to understand why this is really important. And I just want us to work together. It's one of those things. We had a bad fight today, but let's go back to trying to be normal with one another. And I swear, Sapri, it sounds like you like Doug Ford right now. And it's very surreal for me at the moment to hear the praise coming. But welcome aboard the Ford train.
Nathan, final word to you.
How do you follow that up? It's good. Politicians do reflect, and stream of consciousness sometimes can be an okay way to do it. It's not your trade policy. The good cop, bad cop works if the two cops are talking to each other outside the room. So when appropriate and when it's helpful, it's okay that Premier Edie, Premier Canoe, Mr. Ford, they all can sound off and say things Mr. Carney maybe even would like to say in his quieter moments. But you need to have some kind of strategy to it. So you're not doing it when it's unhelpful. And I think Americans just don't know how upset we are. They've probably not, outside of hockey, had this experience of Canadians being really, really upset. And we don't get upset like Americans do. So it's maybe sometimes hard to tell how upset we are. So every once in a while, someone sounds off. That's fine. Gets them on the air. Lets America knows, hey, there's a problem over here. Your guy is acting like a complete arsehole. So please stop it. Vote for somebody else. Change his mind. Do whatever you need to do. So it's fine. But it's good you also walked it back a little bit today.
Yeah, I scanned through all the American broadcasts last night, NBC, CBS, ABC, and they all used those clips liberally in their items. And that obviously got a lot of attention because he knew that was a made-for-TV moment. All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to Priya Devedi, Lisa Ray, and Nathan Cullen. Nice to see you, folks.